Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our liberal breakfast on the Hungarian elections. My name is Jana. I'm in charge of the human rights and EU funding activities of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation here in Brussels. And I have the pleasure to welcome you all today. The Liberal Breakfast are a series of events that the Friedrich Naumann Foundation and the ALDE Party in Brussels have been doing for longer than I can remember, mostly on election results, but also on some highly topical issues. So I invite you to stay up to date with the upcoming ones. Today, we're going to be talking about the elections, which for liberals have been somewhat encouraging, but also obviously very concerning when it comes to the results. And I will be joined today in the discussion by two lovely speakers, one of them being Dániel Berg, who's joining us online, live from Budapest. He is the vice president from the ALDE Party and deputy mayor in Budapest for Momentum. Then on my right, I will be joined by Bálint Gyévai. I always get it wrong.
Gyévai.
Yeah. He's the Secretary General of the European Liberal Youth of LYMEC. I would like to start with you, Dániel. I have to lean over because the banner's a bit in the way, especially with where you are right now. Could you maybe sum up a little bit the election day and the results?
Yes, thank you, Jana, and good morning to everyone. My apologies for not being able to join you in person, but as you can imagine, we have quite a busy time right now after the election. Look, I mean, to be quite blunt, this is not a good election result. It's a bad election result. In fact, it's the worst election result that the opposition has had since 2010, which is, of course, when Orbán won for the first time with a 2/3 majority. But just to give you an impression, in 2014, the opposition had 66 seats. In 2018, the opposition had 65 seats. And currently it has 56 seats. As you can see, it's quite a marked decline there. So a 10-seat decline. There are still some districts which are coming in, so this might change, but I don't think it will change so dramatically that we can't say that this was a bad election result for the united opposition, which is ironic because perhaps, as you know, this is the first time that the opposition was able to form a grand coalition, so that the parties weren't running basically in small blocks against one big bloc, but it was basically two equally balanced blocks, basically between Fidesz and the opposition, as well as some minor or smaller parties, which is also important to note because besides the opposition coalition and besides Fidesz, there's also another party, a new party in parliament now. It's the splinter party of Jobbik, so it's a far-right party. It's an extremist party, and that will be the three political sides which are represented in the Hungarian parliament. So I assume a lot of you would be asking yourself the question, why did this happen? Why did it happen the way it did? And I would say, and I believe a lot of us agree on the opposition side, that one of the main factors was communication. So on one hand, the degree that the opposition could reach voters. Obviously, there's structural elements here, which I'm sure we will talk about a bit more in the follow-up, about the media, about the state propaganda. But I would point more to the question of tone and of content than of structural questions. There was an article that appeared just today in one of the major independent mediums, which was entitled, the lack of populism. So we know that Orbán is the kind of master of populism, of talking about messages in a way that is very relatable and easy to understand for the average voter. And this was something he capitalized on completely in this election as well, whereas the opposition simply did not talk about those topics which are most important for the majority of voters. And I would draw the attention here also to the difference between the voters of Fidesz, or the government coalition, and of the opposition. This is, of course, that there is relevance of the urban and the rural divide, but there's much more relevance of socioeconomic differences. So Fidesz was very, very easily able to get voters who are not making so much money, who don't have several diplomas, who are living in rural areas. In fact, Fidesz did quite well, or actually did the best in those areas which are the poorest regions in Hungary. Some of them are actually amongst the poorest regions in Europe. Whereas the opposition focused on issues like the war in Ukraine, the issues like the constitution, issues like the internal politics of the opposition coalition, of how we will be forming parliamentary groups and so on and so forth. These issues are not relevant to the average voter, if I can use that phrase, though I don't like it, as it's kind of a generalizing one. But these are all issues that are not relevant to people's everyday lives. So going forward, I think that's one of the things that we will have to evaluate and look into, is how do we, obviously we will still be talking about these issues that I mentioned, such as the Ukraine, the constitution and so on, because these are issues that are important to us, but we will have to look at how we can expand into areas which are more relevant for your everyday voter, simply put. And I'm looking forward to hearing Bálint's views on the issue as well.
Thank you. I would invite you to, if you have anything to add on what he just said, but also from your specific perspective, working on youth and electoral processes as well, maybe to point out what the role and the views of youth in this election was as well.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay, good. So first of all, indeed, as Dániel said, even though if you could see online, maybe some information portals or some news agencies saying that it was maybe not that bad, but indeed these are quite bad election results for the Hungarian opposition, obviously, and for liberals. First of all, maybe I would highlight, before getting into explaining a bit the more negative side, just to highlight all the work that has been done on the opposition side, and including from all the members, supporters, and activists of not only Momentum, not only the youth organization of Momentum Tizenix, but also from all the opposition side. There have been a very vibrant campaign ahead of these elections. That's maybe probably something we'll get back to later, but we organized primaries on the opposition side back in September to see who would be the best candidate to face the candidate of the government. So that's, I think, a very interesting democratic process that should be that we should keep in mind also for the future. So there have been a lot of work put in these elections, and I think we should really thank all the people who invested so much time in this over the past weeks and months. On the elections, of course. So more from a youth perspective, Dániel mentioned a few divides. I think there is also a bit of a generational divide, if we can say as well, in the sense that, for example, this poll was released before the elections, but it's probably something to keep in mind that at least 50% of the first-time voters were saying that they would vote for the opposition. This is something quite strong that we can keep in mind also in terms of future perspectives. In the sense that actually Fidesz was quite weak in that age group. So that's of course very important. Building on that, of course, we saw quite a lot of young people involved in the campaign, not necessarily involved 4 years ago. I think we could see that internally in Momentum in Tizenix as well. Young people were really involved on the streets, going door to door, really taking part fully in the campaign. What we can also see probably is that there is a willingness on young people's side to change the future of the country, but it was still complicated to have them all go to vote. So there was a work that has been done, but probably maybe didn't reach its full potential on making sure that young people go to vote, and because they are mostly then would be voting for the opposition, but of course you need to cast your vote and to go to the voting stations on Sunday. Actually, this is also something that the prime minister candidate of the opposition highlighted in an interview yesterday, that there were three main focuses from where the opposition could get the votes. But of course, one was the left wing voters. The second was from more conservative voters that don't identify anymore with Fidesz and that would then vote for the opposition in this case. And the third group he mentioned explicitly that he think was very much present and voting for the opposition were actually young people. So I think this is important to keep in mind. Of course, again, I think what Dániel mentioned is very relevant. There is a huge divide between urban and rural areas, between mostly Budapest, that was indeed mostly won by opposition candidates. I think we have two of the voting districts that are leaning towards Fidesz. I think there is still one that's only a few 0. something percent, so there might be hope to only have one district going to Fidesz. But in any case, on what we could see in Budapest, and especially on the Buda side, where 4 years ago Fidesz candidates were winning, now it was the opposition candidate winning, and some of them momentum candidates. So indeed, I would maybe close this intervention by saying that that there was more involvement from young people in these elections than in previous ones, and maybe last data more on the negative side is that before the elections, 28% of the younger people were saying that if the government is not changing, then they would probably look into an alternative in where to live and maybe leave the country. And correct me if I'm wrong, Dániel, but it's also something we could feel a bit among our activists and among young people in general after the results of the elections. There was this screenshot from Google showing how many people were starting typing on Google opportunities abroad when the election results were starting coming in. So after 8, 9, when we had the first estimates, this is of course very sad, and the fight must continue on the ground. But you can understand some frustration and maybe some disappointment on young people's side in not having this possibility now to change government and have another direction for the country. Thank you.
Indeed. We saw a similar move when Trump was getting re-elected as well in the US, and people started to Google how to move abroad. We hope, obviously, that especially the youth stay strong and invested in the country's future. I would like to follow up maybe with you, Dániel. Building a coalition against a rather autocratic leader like Orbán is a common move and often a necessary move. Would you say that has worked out? What were the advantages, disadvantages now in hindsight as well of doing it this way?
Yes, well, I think just the fact that the coalition exists is historic or significant, because we're looking at 7 parties, 6 parties in the prime minister candidates movement, a political association. So 7 political actors. And these are very different parties. I mean, as you know, Momentum is a liberal party. We have 2 more social democratic leaning parties. We have 2 green parties, one former far right, now moderate right party. So these are very different worldviews. They're very different organizational cultures. They're very different, trajectories. Whereas Momentum is a new party. Relatively, our first election was 2018. We have MSP, which is the legacy party of the former Communist Party. So it's very different in many regards, these organizations. So to put them into one cohesive team, it's a challenge, and I think that's something that the prime minister candidate and the parties themselves was able to do. So I would definitely chalk that up as a positive. Also, the innovation that was the primary. We did organize a national primary from the grassroots level, which was which had quite a huge turnout. It was, I think, about like 25-30%, which for basically a primary that was organized in the, I don't know, garage and the shed of activists and such. It's quite impressive, and we did see quite a bit of a jump in opposition activity. So that was the positive side. The negative side, or one of the challenges, I would say, is that with so many different actors, it's very hard to find a consensus. So you really have to kind of focus on the kind of lowest common denominator. So these are issues like anti-corruption, issues like restoring the rule of law, issues which are important, and they're ones that there's a consensus in, but they're not. Because there is such a consensus, perhaps they're not as exciting or controversial or drawing as much attention as other issues would. So, for example, Fidesz would always use a lot of the kind of economic incentives in the campaign. So they said they would be giving increased social security benefits, getting rid of taxes for young people, et cetera, and et cetera. And these are kind of issues that members of the coalition had a harder time agreeing on, because these parties are so different, their policy platforms are so different, that it's hard to say one thing that they could all get behind, which is specific. Generally, you could say, yeah, we want to lower taxes, but how we would do that, that's more of a policy details question that we couldn't address. And in terms of the future, I think this coalition has to stay together, formally, informally, but due to the kind of realities of politics in Hungary, I don't think that we can draw the conclusion that the coalition model was at fault. We have to look at more what that coalition did, and in the future has to stay active on these issues.
Thank you. Would you like to follow up on that? Otherwise.
Yeah, maybe just one point that we didn't really mention since the beginning is I think it's important to say, Dániel, that the government party Fidesz had no real program, or at least not that that we are aware of. If you go on their website, you cannot find any electoral program, which is very interesting, right? I think many of us here not from Hungary would not be able to imagine that any party would win an election without a clear program that they would share, that would highlight on their different platforms, and that they would bring forward to the citizens. Instead of that, the campaign was very much focused on who is where, on which people are who is involved in which group, and yeah, you could see billboards everywhere in the country highlighting that the prime minister candidate for the opposition was only there as someone who was placed there by the former prime minister, who is also part of the opposition. So it was very much focused on certain people being part of the opposition coalition, and not that much on content. And I think that's where also the opposition struggled, because of course there were proposals, there were ideas how to tackle the high inflation rates, introduce the euro, how to face indeed talk about the current crises we are facing, the post-COVID recovery, the war in Ukraine. But instead of that, this became a very personalized campaign where we focus on some people being there and some buzzwords. The government party really focused on the fact that if they stay in power, then there would be peace. If it's the opposition, then there would be war, because of a massive disinformation campaign explaining that the opposition would send Hungarian soldiers in Ukraine. So many tools, and again, I think that's what also Dániel mentioned at the beginning. Communication was pretty much central here, and instead of focusing on the content, it was instead more of a communication or disinformation game. Not really a game, but the focus was more put on that.
It's actually what I was going to ask you next, tying in nicely. So as we know, the whole campaigning was less about topic and more about people. How would you say, and I'm going to follow up with Dániel after that, how would you say Fidesz has maybe also influenced voters, or like had the chance to influence voters where the coalition didn't have the chance and therefore gain them?
Yes, I mean, again, so the Ukraine war situation was really much pretty much used by the government. Billboards, the TV, of course, so the national TV channels, the control, radio, local press was pretty much used to spread this one-way message of we bring peace, and the opposition would not be able to handle the situation. There would be war. Also stating clearly that if the opposition would be coming in power, they would harm Hungarian citizens by cutting the gas supply directly from Russia. So very trying indeed maintaining this very tense security-focused climate that's present in Hungary since actually a couple of years. And they did the same kind of buzzwording, trying to keep in a fear environment the society, so to say, when we had the migration crisis a few years ago. So in this sense, it was indeed these different communication tools that were used. Also, pretty much a local campaigning, but again, not based on a program, but just these few buzzwords, and also saying that these people would do that. Instead, we will keep the stability. Also, maybe as a last point, let's not forget that when you, of course, have war in your neighborhood, there is already this aspect of people might want to find more stability, not bring change in the moment when this is happening at your doorstep. So this was pretty much used by the government, and also with the idea of, and we already touched upon that the coalition had many different parties in the coalition, and there was a question sometimes from citizens, then how would they agree on a common stance? Would they be fast enough or efficient enough in delivering when facing this potential threat of the war at the neighborhood? And they really used that.
Thank you. Dániel, do you want to add on this?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think the Ukraine war is a really good example of a lot of the dynamics we've been talking about, because on one hand, you had the opposition coalition, which was talking about, well, the things that people in Brussels are talking about: European values, integration, state sovereignty, criticism of Putin. And then on the other hand, you had Fidesz, which was talking about three things, and three things only: one, cheap gas; two, security; and three, stability. And it's quite ironic to see that, populists are not the best at crisis management. You only have to look at the kind of COVID rates and death rates here in Hungary to learn about that. But they're very good at posturing and acting like they're very strong leaders, strong men, encouraging stability. And Orban capitalized that completely. That me, you might not like me as a person, or you might not agree with my positions, but that at least I can govern. I've been here for close to 15 years now. Do you really want to take a chance on this 6 or 7 party coalition, whereas you can just have more of the same? So I think that was a proposition. So instead of a value proposition, it was more of a safety bet for a lot of voters, which of course favored Orban. Yeah, I think that's important to highlight.
So now that the deed is done, Dániel, where would you say, where are we standing? Where are we going with the election results? Like, what does the new government confront? What can the coalition do as well, where they're standing?
Well, Momentum has a special responsibility in this, as we're the second largest bloc in the opposition now, after the Social Democrats. So I think there will be a leadership role that we have to take, just based on the sheer numbers and kind of agenda setting. And of course, we still have a war in the neighborhood. We still have a waning, but global pandemic. There are still a lot of problems that need addressing. So I wouldn't, the work doesn't stop just because of a bad election result. But I think one of the responsibilities we have is to look at what are the things that we could be doing differently. What are the issues that we should be talking more about that we haven't talked enough about. and also finding, new politicians. We did lose quite a few candidates, so we will have to build up a new, new kind of core of politicians. And I would say it's quite important that we have representatives of those demographic groups, which I mentioned, rural, lower socioeconomic status, more of a basic education, Roma, minority candidates who can talk to these communities in a way that is legitimate and in a way that is believable to them. So paradoxically, we have even more work cut out for us now than if we would have won. And of course, we will be having European Parliament elections and municipal elections in 2 years. So it's never too soon to get started on that. As they say in politics, once the election's over, the next one's about to begin. So I think we have to look towards the future.
That's very true. We already touched briefly on several occasions now in the European Union. Maybe you, Bálint, what do you think? How is the election result gonna influence the relationship that Hungary has with the EU? Like, as we know, Fidesz has been very anti-EU, openly have been using it to his ends, and we have things coming up like the rule of law mechanism, where we're hoping that von der Leyen is going to push for it through soon. Like, where do you see this going?
Yeah, I think the first point on that is that it's a strong mandate for the new old government for Fidesz. So I'm sure that they will want to use this also use this advantage at the European level, going back in the next council meeting, with a very strong mandate. So I do think that the future positions might just radicalize a bit rather than being softer in general. So that might indeed create more issues at the European level. I think the relations with Russia here is also a key component. Vladimir Putin was one of the first to congratulate Mr. Orbán for his victory. We know that there is the strong links between the Polish and the Hungarian government, but on this topic, I'm not sure that they are very much on the same line. Quite the contrary. So we have to see how this coalition building in the EU, in light of Orbán's special relationship with Mr. Putin and Russia, would put him in more, put him maybe at in a weaker position for example, in the council. So I do think that unfortunately this might lead to a bit of a more isolated position for Hungary at the EU level when we look at the council, of course. But at the same time, I think together with Dániel, we can really also maybe, and in all this negative, convey maybe a message of hope that momentum is there and that we will continue and we will bring more liberal forces in Hungary as well.
Indeed, because we cannot forget that we still have 11 MPs now from Momentum in the parliament. Dániel, would you agree with Bálint's assessment?
Yes, definitely. I mean, now more than ever, I think there's a need for a liberal perspective. And looking at the numbers, I mean, there is openness to that, and there is an opportunity for that just based on Momentum's result. So yes, definitely, I would agree that there is hope in all this. And again, where we began with Bálint, I have to highlight also the work of the activists, the candidates, the policy experts, the people working on our team. It was really encouraging to see during the primary and during the campaign itself how many people were willing to go above and beyond. So I would not. I would encourage all of you not to look at Hungary as a lost cause, but one that's in a formative process.
We are working on it.
What a positive word. I would like to take this chance, maybe on a positive high, to also open the floor for questions, because we have quite a few people here. We have quite a few online as well. I heard that there is a microphone somewhere in the back.
Kurt Geisert, I'm one of the guides in the House of European History. I have a question for the Deputy Mayor. There is a Hungarian minority in Ukraine, it seems, of 150,000 people. Do you think it would be a good idea if Kiev gives back autonomy to this people which Kiev took away some time ago?
Yes, thank you. Should we do it question by question, or yeah, I guess we can.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yes, and this was actually quite a relevant topic in the campaign. For those who don't know, there's a difference between the way that Hungarian minorities or ethnic groups, so the diaspora here in the surrounding countries can vote, and those from abroad can vote. So people, Hungarians living in, for example, Brussels, they have to go to the consulate or to designated voting positions based on the country. Whereas those living in Romania, in Slovakia, in the Carpathian region in Ukraine, as you mentioned, they can vote by mail. So this has always been a key demographic for Fidesz, and I myself think that we, as the opposition, perhaps didn't talk enough about these issues, particularly in the context of the conflict in Ukraine. I do know that in the talks, the language law, so the use of Hungarian language in schools and public institutions and so on in the Carpathian region is a key point for the one that the Ukrainians have addressed. Obviously, this is also important for the Russians, as there is a large Russian-speaking minority. In terms of autonomy, do I think it would be a good idea? I think there would be a point in discussing this. Do I think there's a reality of it? Not really, no, not in this, in a war conflict, decentralization and granting autonomy to regions isn't common practice. I think in the long term, this will be an issue that has to be resolved because it is one that causes conflict, and it's one that also Russia's capitalizing on, as well as Orban, actually, to create divisions. So in the short term, I think we have to look at steps like the language law, which are more easy to get through, the Rada, and then long term look at a kind of path forward for these regions, because as well, these are some of the poorest regions in Ukraine. Just as you can see in Hungary, where there is a larger minority population, it is less privileged, as it were.
Yeah, just quickly, I mean, it's important because also Hungary was saying that, since we have these issues with the minorities and the education law, Hungary was blocking the NATO membership as well. So this was already a topic before the war starts. Then, of course, in the elections, it was also used. I mean, there were interviews with some Fidesz supporters who were saying that what Mr. Putin is doing is good, and he might free those minorities and give it back to Hungary. I don't know if you heard about that. Yeah, so that was also present. I mean, not at political level, but you could hear it sometimes. Those views were coming from some Fidesz supporters. So I mean, it's completely crazy I'm sorry to hear that that he would legitimize the invasion of Ukraine by saying that well maybe at the end when we would divide the territory of Ukraine, that part will go back to Hungary.
Questions? I saw many more hands.
Why do you think that Orban is such a strong supporter of Putin, although his party is on the right?
Yes, thank you. Well, I mean, Orban does position himself as a conservative, but I would say, not speaking for our friends in the EPP, but I think Konrad Adenauer and the kind of classical European conservative would not be the biggest fan of Orban or his policies. So I think it's important to see that Orban isn't ideological. So if the polls said tomorrow that supporting LGBTQ rights and, I don't know, supporting social democratic or even communist policies would lead to an increase in support, he would do it in a heartbeat. He's had, I don't know, 3 or 4 like turnarounds, as it were. I'm sad to say that he used to be in our party family, in the liberal family, He was actually the vice president of the Liberal International for a while. Then he had a short phase where he was kind of a classic conservative, Christian Democrat. Then came this whole illiberal populist phase. So Orban isn't really ideological. I think his relationship with Putin and with Russia is also one that's based on benefits and on purely realist and rationalist calculations about power and money. It's not an ideological project. I mean, it's funny to see because he was one of the most outspoken critics of the Russian occupation here. One of his first big speeches was basically the main message was, Russians go home, and now he's inviting them back with the, KGB bank in Budapest and the, Chinese bank as well. So I would urge us not to look at this as an ideological pulse string from Orban. He doesn't really have ideals, or, it's not as main factor in his politics as he would want you to believe.
And maybe I would even go further. It's also a matter of a bit of inspiration for him, I feel, because there are patterns of the current Russian system that is trying to put in place also in Hungary. So I would go, indeed, there is no ideology there. It's not about right or left. It's more about the type of system. Dániel mentioned it, an illiberal democracy. That's also the way you can call the kind of regime that Mr. Putin is putting in place, and where all of a sudden, indeed, when it felt like it could end up in big political wins, Mr. Orban also used.
Thanks. Stefano Spinaci from the European Parliamentary Research Service. Sorry for my voice. So first of all, thanks for all the activity that you have done as activists. That's kind of disclaimer. I'm not pro Orban. But I have two sets of questions. The first set is about what happened during this campaign for the vote, and the second is about what's going to happen now. So let's start with the first. And I would concentrate on what was called the poorest part of the country. Most probably you refer to the more peripheral part, or let's say not urban part. And this I say because language is very important. And I think that's a problem that we have in any country where we have populism. We don't understand that even people living in this peripheral area, they have the right to have their political vote, and they shouldn't be considered like poor. While I think that we have to understand how we should get empathy with them. And this I speak from my personal experience, because I come from this kind of background. It's not easy. People from this background, they have really simple thinking, really simple thinking. But if we want to combat populism, we have to understand this simple thinking, and we have to speak to this simple thinking, not only thinking that is poor, so is not educated, and that we have to get only their vote. We have to communicate with the same language. Second set of questions, sorry, just an addendum on this. Do you have any data on how the youth, how the young people has voted in this not urban area? So when you say that, I think you said more than 50%, they voted not for Orban, it would be interesting to know how young people in this not urban area has voted also. Second set of questions is about what I read on a Financial Times article this morning, and they were referring to the fact that Orban has got a majority that it will allow him to change your constitution. So, and second, they mentioned also that Orban could go for a kind of a nationalization of some companies. So, would you like to comment on this? Thanks. Sorry again for my voice.
Maybe I would take the first part of the question and leave the second part to Dániel, if that's fine for you as well. So on the first part, indeed, I mean, we're not saying it's poor areas should be like, treated differently. And of course, you need to talk to everyone. That's what also Dániel was saying, that the work is starting now. We indeed, as the results are showing, we're quite strong in Budapest or more cities. There is this divide, and now we need to work on not having this divide next time, and get in each town and in each smaller villages, and then talk to the people and make sure that the message is reaching. Because what we saw indeed is that in some of those peripheral areas that you mentioned, there are places where Fidesz won with 90%, and you basically it's not really about politics there. It's the mayor is from Fidesz. People know the mayor. Please vote Fidesz. Then you vote Fidesz. I mean, this dependency, this linkage is present, and our message. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dániel, but our message didn't reach there. It seems, because the results are showing it. You have this very high rate of voting for Fidesz. Nearly everyone in certain villages voted for the government party. So indeed, there is a lot of work to be done there. On the young people side, I mean, what I mentioned, the poll was before the elections. It's not clear exactly, how at the end the percentages are of young people voting where. What's for sure is that we also need to work on getting the youth politics in those areas, because I think there is interest, as I said, and dynamism from young people to get involved. But the parties and maybe the youth structures of the parties are often very indeed city-centered, and it seems to be something far away. And I don't think that's just an issue in Hungary, actually. You can find that in other countries as well, where indeed you would have young people who would maybe want to be involved or participate in the discussions and so on. But the party structures or the structures in place would be maybe a bit seem to be a bit too far, not focused on their daily issues, not focused on their realities. So I think that's when we mentioned that the work starts now. That's also what we meant, that there will be a work in the parliament, but of course, as you said, 2/3 majority doesn't allow you to be to change that much on the issues in place. But there is a real work to do outside of the parliament.
Yes, thank you for the question. I think it's a very important one, and also why we began with that. Look, I mean, first and foremost, I want to stress that when I was speaking, about poor, less educated, different socioeconomic status, I didn't mean this in a pejorative fashion. It's simply a statement of fact. If you look at the GDP and the kind of, economic development map of Hungary, the regions where Fidesz was most successful, this is usually the south, the east. So yes, the periphery, as you mentioned, they're the most economically depressed regions as well, particularly in terms of lack of jobs, in terms of a lack of industry, highly agrarian. So this is, I think it changes at the core what these people think and care about, which, it is what it is. There tends to be this paternalistic view from the fair trade hipster coffee house in Budapest, where people say, oh, we have to go down to the countryside and we have to educate the people about the real issues. But I think this is and as the selection clearly shows, it's not the way to go, because it's just something that is not successful. It's not things that they care about if we go and talk about these same issues that people are discussing in that aforementioned coffee house. And that's why I also wanted to emphasize the importance of finding authentic leaders who are present in the community. So we are not thinking of this narrative of going down there and visiting once every 4 years when there's an election, but where we have real political activism and activity going on every day of the year with people who are from the community, who look and think like the people from the community. Because at the end of the day, I can go down there and talk about the European Union and, I don't know, constitutional issues, but everyone will just see a liberal elite from the capital who, is not as relatable. So I think it's, I don't have all the answers. It's more of a challenge, but I think it's something that we need to we need to work on to how to address this community. I think we have some online questions as well, but I'll hand it back to Jana.
Dániel, do you have them? Okay.
Yes, indeed, we have some questions online. I will do 2 in a row, so we will be a bit faster for Dániel. The first one is like, with so much control from the government over the media, how are you going to work on spreading your message in the next years for the following ones? And the second then is, you joined, so Momentum was part of a coalition to run for these elections. How are you going to keep working, or will you keep working with the other parties that were meant to go together in the coalition in the upcoming years?
Yeah, would you like to begin, or if you can start, and I'll take this.
Yeah. I mean, the communication one is a tough one, of course. You have to bear in mind that if you are on your TV and you have maybe your first 10 TV channels, I think I'm not exaggerating, Dániel, if I say that 8 or 9 out of 10, actually, I only have one in mind that would not be basically biased towards the government or completely controlled and by the government in what they are saying. One of them, all the TV show presenters actually even actively campaigned for the government, which is quite crazy if you think about it, because you know, your role as a journalist and as a media is to share information, provide information to the public. But then they made short clips to support the government. So I don't think we can talk there about you know, any kind of media the way it should be defined. So there indeed there is a big issue of the source of information. On how to do it, I will hand the floor more to Dániel on how the perspectives from the ground are more. But indeed there should be when it comes to young people, you know, young people also use social media. There is maybe more way to mobilize, and I think, and this has been done during the campaign, it should be probably be done more on a regular basis, is indeed create communities everywhere, do political activism on a regular basis, and go to door to door and talk to the people.
Yes, I think this relates quite directly to the second question, which was about the future of the coalition. I definitely think that it's a coalition that has to stay together. I think we have to make it even closer and stronger than it was for the election, so that it's a true alliance instead of just kind of a coalition of necessity. And I think that one of the jobs that this coalition has to do is build out the parallel institutions that can kind of combat those controlled by the government. So I'm talking about alternative forms of media, about you know, new platforms or forums where people can exchange views, but also, you know, in the if you want to think in the classical term, then a shadow government, where you have speakers from the opposition who are credible and have the knowledge to react at a very short notice to the government's you know, kind of steps and actions. And this will be a big challenge as well. I mean, we have the resources. I think if all the opposition parties pool their resources, then I think we have a better chance at building platforms like this and creating these opportunities. And it'll be a very active 4 years, I think. I don't envy the government, because it'll be a difficult 4 years. I have perhaps a little sympathy for them, but I don't envy them, because it will be 4 years of inflation, of a regional conflict, which has the potential to escalate, of a huge deficit in the government funds. So it will be a tough one, and I think the opposition will have to address these issues in a united fashion.
Maybe just if I can, indeed, there was this idea already of a kind of a shadow national news agency, a shadow MT, which is the name of the national news agency. And the prime minister candidate in an interview actually yesterday said that that's maybe one of the the bigger project that was not achieved this time. So indeed, that's something probably to work on in the coming months and years.
Maybe also, yeah.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to mention that another concept that didn't get as much attention perhaps was setting up like a shadow prosecutor's office, because the prosecutor is under direct influence from Orban. Obviously, this would be a symbolic forum, but to really like talk about issues of corruption, for example, in real time.
For those that are here in person, also, if you're interested in the topic of state capture of media, of Orban, of the model, we have a couple publications that FNF did with the International Press Institute and a press freedom mission we did. So like you find more information on that at the entry of the registration. I saw that there is another question over here.
Thank you. My name is Timea Lapshansky. I work at the European Parliament, and I am a Hungarian minority in Romania. So when it comes to elections and this talk about poor regions, educated regions, and socialists and Democrats, it's kind of the same thing in Romania as well. And we are having this conversation for years now, how to reach the people who are sort of further away from us from an ideological perspective. And I do agree with Dániel here that the solution is not to go there every 4 years and educate them, but I do think that education is the only way in which we can change something in a structural, systematic fashion, because otherwise these far-right leaders or dictators or autocrats will keep winning elections based on manipulation, fear. Now, it's kind of obvious that after the pandemic and the war, these elections were won based on fear. And you can't really manipulate educated people through fear. So my question would be, how can we sort of start investing more in civic education, not just every 4 years? How can we reach the people and talk through their language, really understand their needs, really assess what they need from the opposition? We can really change the curricula and what it's taught in schools, but what else, what other tools do we have for proper civic education, so we have people who vote based on ideologies and facts and not on fear and short-term promises, let's say. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. Momentum actually had a pretty interesting project, which was focused on providing, how should I translate it? I guess like civic education forums. So basically in the local communities, we would have people volunteer, oh, I'm a lawyer, so I can hold a class about, like community classes about, how to fill out your taxes or how to, I don't know, file an appeal to a court motion. So very practical things like that. And also, more abstract knowledge, like, history, culture, etc. So, obviously it's not the place of the opposition and we don't even have the resources to provide like alternative social services. But I think this kind of engagement with the community would be a good way to go forward. I mean, there's also a political rationale here. It also kind of achieves the goal of being present in these communities constantly with local people getting engaged. Because I think Bálint mentioned this, and it's something I wanted to highlight too, that due to the media, I mean, direct voter contact is really the best way that you can reach the voter in Hungary. A direct conversation face to face. So I think any initiative, whether it's education, whether it's even just informal events where perhaps it's not so super political, but really just a chance to get to know each other, I think these are important and have to be maximized as tools in this media landscape.
I heard we have one more digital question.
Yes, another question from our viewers at home, especially this is from Anders Vasvol, who is the steering committee chair of our ALDE individual members. He's literally saying, the opinion polls were very close, opposition within striking distance. I would have thought people might hesitate to talk against Orban, so the opposition would be underestimated. Instead, Fidesz outperformed in the polls. What do you think that happened?
Thank you, Anders. Well, in terms of the polls, I'm very skeptical always about polling. Because, for example, in 2019, during the mayoral election, when I was elected as well, they said that the incumbent Fidesz mayor has plus 7-8%. In the end of the day, it was like the opposite of that. I've also spoken a lot to social scientists and pollsters here in Hungary, and they've always said that it's very difficult to get accurate measurements in Hungary because, you know, it's just culturally kind of, you know, in Eastern Europe, it's harder in general because of this kind of post-communist experience where people don't necessarily want to talk openly about their political views to strangers on the phone. So I'm always skeptical about the polling numbers. This time, unfortunately, the polls, at least one poll that I saw was quite close. So now it's 35-53 is the result. And I think they had in that poll somewhere around like 40-60, 40-55, something like this. So unfortunately, this time the at least one poll that I saw was quite right, and the view of the opposition that they're underrepresented was not something that bore out in reality, sadly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know anymore who said that, Dániel, you might remember, but someone said that the polls are made for democracies, and therefore it's not something we should rely on before the Hungarian election. I think it was some opposition politician, but indeed, I mean, last time, or at least for the Budapest mayor position, the polls were indicating that the Fidesz candidate would win by, I think, was 7%, as you said, indeed, and then the opposition candidate won by 7%. So it's very in one way to another, and the polls didn't really look like being good predictors to the final results in the past couple of years. So that's indeed something we have to look at more carefully than I would say also in the future for future elections. That's not necessarily telling us the reality on what's going to happen then when people go to vote.
On that note, I'm looking at the clock and it's 9:30 sharp. So I think it's time for us to wrap it up for today. I would like to thank our two speakers to join us today. And I would like to thank everybody at home and everybody here in the room to join us so actively in the discussion. A little side note for the viewers here, whoever arrived before me and didn't get to sign the signature list yet, please, on your way out, could you leave a little signature? Other than that, thank you so much, and have a good day.
Thank you, Jana, and all of you.